this video, we're going to talk about the emperors that succeeded Helagabal. Now, Helagabal was a ruthless tyrant. He nearly tore up the Roman Empire into smithereens. He was ruthless and he was useless. Now, Helagabal was succeeded by Opelius Macrinus, who was a Berber. He was a North African. He was a native North African. He was not even Italian or Latin. He was also a useless emperor. He was what we call a Now, Opelius Macrinus was one of these barrack emperors. He was a useless, ruthless man, and so was his son, Caesar. So like we said, Opelius Macrinus declared himself emperor somewhere in Mesopotamia, somewhere in modern day, in the borders of modern day Syria and Iraq. Right, and he claimed himself emperor. He was beloved by the troops. The troops soon forgot all about Helagabal because Helagabal was a ruthless tyrant. He was useless. He was a piece of crap. And So in the year, it's 2017, Opelius Macrinus and his crack Roman troops fought with Artabanus, the king of the Parthians, and the Romans were defeated. They were humiliated because Opelius Macrinus was a useless emperor. So it's quite funny that in Roman times, if the emperor is a good man, so it's quite funny that in Roman times, if the emperor is the capable and good emperor, the Roman troops fight well. Now, if the Roman emperor is a useless brat, if he's a useless emperor, then the Roman troops fight miserably. So the troops go along with the emperor. Now, Opelius Macrinus was a weak emperor, so the Roman troops fought badly in the battle. And the Parthians, under the king, Artabanus, defeated them at a city called Nisibis. And the Romans were forced to fall back to Antioch. They were quite humiliated again. Now, 2018 is the final year of Opelius Macrinus' life. And what happened was two of his commanders, Efthianus and Glanis, they supported the claims of a certain prince called Varius Helagabalus. Now, Varius Helagabalus was none other than the son of Sarmatian. He was a nephew of Julia Domna. So he was part of the royal family of Emesa, Homs, in modern day Syria. Now let us remind people that Homs, Emesa, had a royal line of Syrian kings, native Syrian, not Arabs, Syrian kings, who married one of the kings. So in this final year, 2018, commanders Efthianus and Glanis supported Helagabalus. Now, Julia Domna, who was part of the royal family of Emesa, Homs, married Septimus Severus. So one of her sisters was Julia Zoamia, and her son was Helagabalus. Right. And the other nephew was Alexiano, or Alexander. They laid claim to the empire. Now, if the Efthianus and Glanis, who were probably bribed by the grandmother of Helagabalus, supported, bribed these officers, and that's how. And a battle was fought between the supporters of Opelius Macrinus and the supporters of this young little prince called Helagabalus, or Varius. And because of bribery, because most of the soldiers were fed up of Opelius Macrinus, so the supporters of Helagabalus actually won the battle of Antioch in the summer of 218. Because people were fed up of this Opelius Macrinus, they thought, well, they saw that Opelius Macrinus was a nobody. He was a Berber, he was not even Italian, he was not even Latin. So they gave up his claim, they supported Helagabalus. Now Macrinus was arrested and executed. Now, Helagabalus was a pervert, actually, and we have one of the sources, Historia Augusta. The Historia Augusta, written by anonymous writers in the 4th century AD, talks about all the sexual parties they did, all these pervert parties they did, homosexual relationships, love triangles, and all these sort of things. Now, if you read the Historia Augusta, you see that Nero, you see that Caligula is nothing compared to Helagabalus. Helagabalus was only 14 when he succeeded the throne in 218. He was nothing. He was a young boy. He was 14, and he practically knew nothing about governing the empire. And yet, he was a pervert. There's all sorts of stories that he forced his commanders to be homosexuals. He forced the consuls, the senators, to be homosexuals, and he wanted to become a transvestite, and all these sort of stories. But anyway, we're not going to focus on these stories. Some of them may be lies, some of them may be deliberate. And now what happened was that in 221, 2.5 years after his succession, Helagabalus was forced to appoint his cousin Alexiano, who was also part of the Emesa dynasty of Syria, as his appointed son. Well, he was a cousin. Now the cousin became the son, the adopted son. And in the same year, Helagabalus tried to murder his cousin Alexiano, but the Praetorian Guards and other troops rushed to the side of Alexander, and they supported the claim of Alexander. And they tried to murder Helagabalus himself for being unfaithful to the pact. In the following year, 222, Helagabalus and Alexander were appointed consuls, joint consuls. Helagabalus was the senior consul, and Alexander was the minor consul of the year. And he was forced to appoint his cousin, appointed son, as in order to show that they were co-rulers. So by fixing a consulship, fixed consulship in this year, they proved that they were co-rulers. Now Helagabalus once again tried to break this pact, and again he sent murderers to kill Alexander. Now the first time, Helagabalus tried to murder his cousin, or his son. It was his mother who actually saved his life. So Armenia, also known as Semiramis, and she was also known to be a licentious woman. Anyway, she saved his life. Now, in the second time Alexander tried to kill his cousin, his son, his mother could not save him. And we have a source claiming that when the Praetorians actually murdered Helagabalus and his mother Soamia, they dragged their bodies and they threw them in the Tiber. Another source claims that they threw them into a sort of sewer. So they cut the bodies up in pieces and they put them in the sewer, which was terrible, which was disgusting actually. But that's how the Romans treated traitors, people who betrayed the Republic, people who were traitors, and all the sources are actually biased against Helagabalus, who was, after all, a 14-year-old boy, and during his 4-year reign, he died at the age of 18. So a boy who was like 14 or 18, he doesn't really know much about ruling an empire. He hasn't really fought any battles. I mean, he was just a pervert boy, and he liked boys, and he liked parties, he liked drinking. So we can't really be so biased against the boy who was only 14 and he suffered from sexual desires, or he was trying to find his own identity at that young, tender age. So it was probably his mother's fault and his grandmother's fault. Right, that he was not fit to rule, perhaps at that time. So anyway, and now finally, after the year 180, in 180, one of the finest Romans, one of the finest emperors Rome ever had, Marcus Aurelius, died of an ailment. And he took them, and he took Rome something like 42 years to acquire a true emperor, an emperor who was true to the Roman Republic, who was an intellectual and a good man as well. And his name was Alexander Severus, or Alexianus in Latin. And again, he was part of the Homs dynasty. His father may have been a Roman, but definitely his mother was a Syrian princess, related to Julia Domna, Julia Sormia, and the rest of the family. Now, Alexander Severus had a great line of tutors. He had lots of Greek, Latin, and perhaps native Syrian or Phoenician tutors. He had mathematicians, he had all sorts. Well, now, Alexander Severus had a great line of intellectuals, doctors, geometricians, mathematicians, and he was also introduced into all sorts of religions. He was also known to be favourable to Christianity. He was also a pro-Christian, one of the first pro-Christian emperors, as even Marcus Aurelius was against the Christians. Even though Marcus Aurelius was the finest emperor Rome ever had, still he was against the Christians. And we see with Alexander, he was favourable to them as well. Now, one of the two finest people who were in his court, in the court of Alexander. Now, one of the two most important people who were in the court of Alexander, they were none other than Domitius Ulpianus, the great Phoenician lawmaker. Domitius Ulpianus, who wrote laws for Rome, and then there was Cassius Dio, the big Greek senator, historian, commander, who was behind the scenes. And well, after the death of Aurelius, of course, he was hiding. He was fearing all these tyrants and all these civil wars. Well, as were all the intellectuals. And what happened was that Domitius Ulpianus was appointed the regent of the young Alexander. Now, let's not forget that Alexander Severus was also young. He was slightly older than Helagabalus. He was roughly the same age as, so he was probably 18 or 16 when he took over, after his cousin was murdered. Now what happened was, now in the early days of his reign, the Praetorian Guards, they rebelled and they murdered Ulpianus. And the leading Praetorian who was responsible for the death of Ulpianus was Epagathos. Perhaps he was a Greek man. Now we don't really know why Ulpian was murdered, but there was, and the people rose. So we don't really know why these Praetorians killed Ulpianus, but the populace of Rome did not stand it. And they revolted, and there was sort of street fighting between the Praetorian Guards and certain of the civilians of Rome. And Alexander, being one of the finest emperors, he brought about a compromise. But his good lawmaking region was soundly killed. Now, a few years later, certain Berbers or Mauritanians, they revolted and they were defeated by a certain commander called Curius Celsus, and a bunch of Illyrians also revolted and they were defeated by a certain Varius Marcinus. Now there was a certain Macrinus, another Macrinus, who became the father-in-law of Alexander Severus. Now what happened was that Macrinus plotted Right, Macrinus plotted against his son-in-law, Alexander, but the plot was discovered, and what happened was that Macrinus was arrested and executed, and Alexander's mother, Mamea, forced Alexander to divorce this wife. And this wife, we don't really know her name, she was exiled to Libya, somewhere in Libya. Now in the year 229, Cassius Dio was appointed consul along with the emperor himself. And this was not the first time that the great Greek historian, commander, consul, the man behind the scenes, it was not the first time that he was appointed consul. But according to Cassius Dio himself, so he writes about himself, he was forced to spend most of his consulship outside of Rome itself because he feared the Praetorian Guards. You see, the Praetorian Guards had executed Domitius Ulpianus, the regent and lawmaker, so he feared for his life. That's the year 229. Now in 2030, what happened was, around these years, there was a civil war in Parthia, and the Persians, they rebelled against the Parthians, who were also Iranians, and there was fighting with the Hyrcanians and other Persian tribes. So in the civil war arose the new Persian Empire. So the Parthians, who rebelled against the successors of Alexander the Great, became the rulers of the Iranian plateau, and now, around the year 2030, they were succeeded by the Persians themselves. And the first emperor of the new Persian Empire was called Artaxerxes. Right, and these Persians started raiding Roman Mesopotamia, and they besieged some Roman forts. And the Shah sent 400 cavalrymen as emissaries to Alexander, and Alexander, of course, he had them arrested, right, because he feared that they were spies or whatever. Right, and then, perhaps in the same year, a certain Ovinius Camillus planned to overthrow the emperor, and of course, this man, this Camillus guy, he was arrested and he was sent to his estate, and later he was ordered to open up his veins or commit suicide because of treason. Perhaps Alexander tried to be humane, but then perhaps he was forced by some of his advisors to execute this man. Now, 2032 is an important year. Alexander Severus himself campaigned against the new Persian Empire, and he actually defeated Shah Xerxes or Artaxerxes somewhere in Mesopotamia, somewhere in modern Iraq, maybe. Now, according to the History of Gustav, this new Persian army, included 700 elephants, 1,800 scythes, chariots, and 120,000 cavalry, which is quite excessive. But anyway, all these people were defeated by the Romans. Another Roman army under Junius Palmatus defeated the Armenian traitors, because some of the Armenians were pro-Persian, and the same force entered Media via Armenia, and the Romans defeated the Persians in Armenia and in Media. They captured several forts, and during this campaign, a certain Taurinius rebelled against Alexander Severus, and he was arrested and executed like the rest of these usurpers. Now, this victory, this Roman victory against Persia, not Parthia, Persia, was quite important because the Romans under a real emperor defeated the Persians at the outset of their new empire. We're talking about the new Persian Empire as opposed to the old Parthian Empire. And this new Persian Empire, starting from roughly 229 AD, it lasted until the age of Muhammad the prophet, the so-called prophet. And now, a couple of years later, in 235 there was unrest in Germania. Maximinus Pupienus, a senator and a commander who briefly became emperor later on, he defeated the Germans and the Sarmatians in some unknown campaigns, and a group of Germans actually invaded Gaul and they devastated some cities, and Alexander Severus himself marched into Gaul and he defeated the Germans, and he defeated some of the Germans who invaded Illyria, parts of modern-day Yugoslavia. But what happened was, all of a sudden, this Thracian barbarian arrived. This Maximinus was a big, tall Thracian. He was not Italian, he was not Latin, he could barely speak the tongue. He was a barbarian, mercenary captain. And he was promoted Praetorian Guard, and somehow he undermined Alexander Severus in front of his Praetorians, and Alexander was murdered actually. He was murdered along with his mother, Mamea, Julia Mamea, part of the Emesa dynasty, and thus ended the Severian dynasty, which was not Italian. We must note that it was Phoenician and Syrian. Part of it was Phoenician from Tripoli, which is today Tripoli in Libya, and the rest of it was from Homs, Emesa, the royal family of Emesa. And Alexander Severus was the only notable ruler out of the four. I mean, Septimus Severus was a benefactor after the civil wars, but during the civil wars he was ruthless. He was cunning. He executed thousands of senators and those who supported it. Now, Helagabal was a ruthless tyrant. Opelius Macrinus was a useless emperor. He was a Berber. He was not even part of the family. He was not even Latin Italian. Helagabalus, as we said, was a young boy. He was only 14 years old. He was confused. He was searching for his sexual identity, and he was not fit to rule. It was basically his grandmother and his mother Mamea who promoted him. And the true princeps during the Severian dynasty was Alexander Severus. He was cunning, and he was a wise man. He was educated. He was kind. He had good advisors like Ulpianus, Cassius Dio, the Greek historian, and he was kind, and that's why he was murdered. And after the murder of Alexander Severus, we see a series of useless usurpers, and it's because of them that now it was because of these useless usurpers that the Persians were able to march through Mesopotamia, Assyria, parts of Syria. A couple of years later, they even captured Antioch. They even captured Valerianus, one of the later emperors. And Alexander Severus, or Alexianus, was open to all sorts of philosophies, all sorts of new ideas. He was kind to the Christians, he was kind to the Jews, he was kind to the Greeks, and he had all sorts of tutors. He was kind. He was like a new Octavian. Only he was not a real Italian. He was not Latin. And it was all because Helagabal, a couple of years back, gave the opportunity to non-Romans to become Roman citizens. So you see Syrians, you see Greeks, you see all sorts of right. And this new Persian Empire, like we said, could win the Romans if the Romans had a weak emperor. Now, if the Romans had a good emperor like Aurelianus, we'll talk about him soon, they could easily defeat the Persians. Now, Alexander was a sort of philosopher king. He was nothing like his cousin Helagabalus. He was a pervert. He was nothing like Helagabal the tyrant. He was nothing like like Septimus Severus. He was a benefactor, but he was a ruthless tyrant during the civil wars. Now we see Alexander had several usurpers, but he did not go to length. I mean, killing all the relatives and all he just killed the particular usurper. And That's the big difference between Septimus Severus and his civil wars. And sadly, this big, huge Thracian barbarian, Maximinus, took over. This illiterate guy who was not even Latin. He just killed him during these barbarian raids in Gaul. And thus ended the great philosopher king, Alexander Severus, or Alexianus. Right, this is a coin of the usurper, Opelius Macrinus, who was a Mauritanian. And this is a bust of the young Helagabalus, the weak emperor. And finally, this is Alexander Severus, one of the finest emperors Rome had.